today's first session of Purpose and Profit to kick off the new year. We've got people hopping in. So as you your audio starts to connect and you can hear me, feel free to write in the chat where it is that you are calling in from today. Maybe if you have a social enterprise, feel free to put your social enterprise name in there, and what you're looking forward to learning about in today's session, or key takeaway that you thought would be cool to hear. And yes, we welcome people always to turn on their cameras. It's always nice to see some smiling faces instead of a sea of names. But if you're having your lunch right now, we understand that you may not want to have your camera on, so no worries at all. So we'll wait a couple more minutes for people to hop into the room, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, Brenda. Great to see you.
Thanks, Deidre.
Awesome. Jim's coming in from Ottawa. I'm sure we have a lot coming in from that area. Awesome to see. Okay, great. So I think we have quite a few people who have joined now. So welcome everyone to today's session, our first session of Purpose and Profit to kick off 2023. And the title of today's session is Climate Resilience for Planet and Profit, with the subtitle Regenerative and Ecological Farms. So that will be our focus for today, is regenerative ecological farms. So we're so excited. At the fund, we have a lot of our loan clients that are ecological farmers, and we get to speak with them a lot. And so it's something that we're very involved in. And we just love to highlight all the things that ecological farmers do for people, the planet, and profit, and helping Ontario's local food system. So we're really excited to bring you today's session. We will start off today's session with a land acknowledgement. Myself, I am based in outside of Oshawa, which is the traditional territory of the Squamish Island First Nations people. So taking a moment now to recognize how grateful we are to be on each of our own lands, that we have the opportunity to live here in Canada, and all the blessings that come with that, as well as all of our technology, which allows us to communicate with each other. So we're not meeting physically, but we are meeting virtually, and all of the technology that allows us to communicate, our heating in our houses, our computers, our internet, all of the technology and resources that traditionally our computers, all the resources that make that up are often taken from traditional lands throughout the world. So recognizing that it's really a blessing that we're able to communicate this way, and all that comes into actually being able to hold these sessions. So taking a moment now and recognizing that before we go into that, to our session today. Okay, so our session today, we have three fabulous speakers, and then two separate presentations. Our first speaker today is Stuart, who is coming to us from NFUO and Climate Action. And our second speakers will be Luke and Ava Dinan from Grey Wolf Gardens. So they will both speak one after the other, and after that, after you've heard their fabulous information, we will have time to actually go into breakout rooms where you'll be able to speak to them. We'll have a couple guiding questions to stimulate thoughts in your brain of what to ask and what to speak about. But this is really an opportunity for you to understand what they're doing a little bit better, ask questions, even just having really thoughtful discussions about everything that they're working on, and that you may be working on where you are at. So yeah, and at the very end, we will have a poll, which we really welcome everyone to fill out so we can better understand how the session was and really get feedback on how we can make the next sessions even better. So our two different presentations today, these are our social educator and social entrepreneurs. So our first speaker is Stuart Oke, and I'll just read a short bio for Stuart. So Stuart was raised outside of Kingston, Ontario, and grew up in a non-farming family. But after an accidental season that he spent working on organic farms in Ireland as a member of like WWOOF, so like woofing, many people are probably familiar, he turned to farming full-time in 2009. So since then, Stuart has farmed throughout Ontario and Quebec. He has the privilege of learning from and apprenticing under some really inspirational and professional farmers over the years. In 2017, he co-founded Rooted Oak Farm, a vegetable and cut flower farm serving the Ottawa and Kingston area. But a little more about Stuart is that he is a proud member of the NFU, so National Farmers Union, and has worked as an organizer at the grassroots, provincial and national level of the organization. He served as the National NFU Youth President for 3 years, and he is the current Vice President of the Canadian Organic Growers, and is a passionate advocate of ecological and organic production. He also chairs the NFU Climate Committee and works in various capacities for the Farmer Coalition, which Farmers for Climate Solutions. And in the winter months, when he's not otherwise working, you can also hear him on the Who Will Feed Us podcast, where he's a producer and co-host. So Stuart has his hands in a lot of different pies, which is fantastic, all the work that you are doing, Stuart. So thank you so much. We will just also introduce Luke and Ava as well before Stuart goes to speak, so then they can speak one after the other in succession. So Luke and Ava Dinan are first generation farmers and began Grey Wolf Gardens in 2020 on a 75-acre property in the small northern town of Cochrane, Ontario. People may be familiar. Grey Wolf Gardens work focuses on cold climate food solutions, given that it's in the north, that integrate regenerative farming practices, agroforestry, and the holistic management framework. They currently offer seasonal and storage vegetables, as well as culinary and medicinal herbs and mushrooms, which is just fantastic. So Luke and Ava met in 2019 when attending Algonquin College in Pembroke, Ontario, and immediately bonded over their shared love of the wild and a vision for a future that included homesteading and running a small-scale organic farm. So they both graduated with honors, and Luke as a forestry technician and Ava as a wilderness guide and entrepreneur. So after that point, many things ensued, and once they graduated, they moved north to Cochrane to begin their journey. Cochrane is a plant hardiness zone 2B, so that means with 90 or less frost-free growing days, and the potential for frost or snow is present all 12 months of the year. So with this challenging environment, Grey Wolf Gardens have established themselves as resilient advocates for local food security and are blazing new trails in cold climate food production. So we're so excited to have them both here with us today and all of the innovations that they're creating to learn from them. But without further ado, we'll have Stuart give his presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to FFF for the invitation to speak today. I'm really excited to be here and talk a little bit about my experience both as a farmer and working with some of the organizations that Dee outlined in that far too lengthy bio that was read about me. As she said, my name is Stuart Oke, slide. And myself and my partner, Nikki, run an organic farm located in North Augusta, Ontario, which is midway between North Augusta, for those of you that don't know probably, is located in between Ottawa and Kingston. And we have an organic vegetable farm there, and slide. We have an organic vegetable farm there where we grow on about 15 acres or so. A good proportion of that is in green manure and cover crops, with the rest being in vegetable and cut flower production. You can see in this photo here, this is a drone shot of our farm, which is a very skinny, long rectangle, and you can see, perhaps you can see some of the vegetable and cover crop blocks that we have all the way down to the road at the far end of the picture. There, slide. In terms of where we grow, we're in a rotational system, moving through some of those cover crop blocks, and we market our produce and flowers into the Ottawa capital region and also into the Kingston area. And we do that through farmers markets, which make up about 40% of our revenue every year. And then the rest goes into a summer and winter CSA program that we operate for 25 weeks of the year, something like that. All said and told, and we do a little bit of wholesale selling just into the sort of area immediately an hour around where our farm exists, just to make up some of the difference at the end of the year. Slide. So here you can see a photo of myself and my partner Nikki, and from the beginning, it's been important for us to emphasize strong regionalized communities. One of the things that drove us to get into farming to begin with was, besides both loving food, I think Nikki and I both identified some problems within our current food system, and we wanted the farm that we eventually started to create in 2017, and then in 2020 we purchased our own farm where we are now and moved there, and we wanted that farm to really be a model for the food system that we wanted to create. And so in many ways we've built our farm around that idea, and that means a whole number of different things, from how we grow to the way that we market our produce. But what we've tried to do is place community, both the community that we feed and the way that we interact with that community, at the core of our business. Slide. Part of that work has been working at various levels on advocacy, and realizing that although we feel proud of the work that we do and our ability to influence the customers that choose to buy from us, that some of the big picture food system change and solutions that we wanted to see is it's necessary to work with others in order to see that change affected. And so that's why we've apportioned time on our farm and carved out space during the day and in lots of evenings to work with a number of different farming organizations that were mentioned in the bio. Canadian Organic Growers is one of the 3 national organizations that represent organic producers in Canada, and they focus on farmer training, education, and advocacy. Farmers for Climate Solutions is a relatively new organization that's just existed for the last few years, but it's a national coalition of farmer organizations that are working together to develop policy solutions that will benefit farmers and the environment, as well as train farmers on the impacts of the climate crisis on their farms, and how they can integrate best management practices that can help sustain them financially, but also help sustain the environment long term, which are 2 very interconnected pieces, which I'm happy to turn back to a little later on. And finally, the National Farmers Union. The National Farmers Union is a voluntary direct membership organization that was established in 1969 through an act of parliament, and it works on a broad range of agricultural policy. And I was lucky to be the youth president with the National Farmers Union for a number of years, and currently work with their climate crisis committee to help promote solutions for the climate crisis that are going to work for the farmers and the environment. So those organizations make up the core of how our farm kind of contributes to the larger conversation around the climate, and they're a core part of what we do. Slide. In terms of looking at the idea around sustainability as it relates to financial profitability, of course, there's lots of different types of profitability. Just one is financial. There are numerous others, and what sustainability has almost become like a buzzword in the last several years. What does sustainability mean to us? Really, it means a combination of things. It certainly means financial sustainability, because we can't continue to do the type of work that we feel passionate about without being financially sustainable. But for us, it also means environmental sustainability. How can we grow in such a way that we can continue to grow that way indefinitely, and contribute to the overall health of the piece of land that we're stewarding long term? And there's also a sustainability in mental health. We really need to run a business that is sustainable long term for us in our ability to not run ourselves into the ground and burn the candle at both ends, and perhaps be able to take a vacation every once in a while. Those kind of intangible things that when you first start farming seem impossible. And not that they're slightly more possible today than when we started in 2017, but it's a work in progress. But certainly the idea that sustainability and of your emotional health is a really critical piece of this, and you need to be able to do it long term. In terms of looking back and reflecting on financial sustainability, though, as it relates to ecological practices, it's we really looked at three main categories on our farm, and this is sort of where I put on a hat as a farmer, and also as a representative and somebody that works with those various organizations. So I'll try to bounce back and forth between the two perspectives. But in general, we're seeing how increasingly there's real marketing and consumer demands for ecological products and sustainable products. We are seeing how a lot of ecological growing, for those people that are ecological farmers themselves, they know what kind of resilience and benefits those bring to their farm. But increasingly, with the climate crisis in mind, we've seen how that resilience has really made our farms a lot less risky, as we've seen the fruit of those practices being able to mitigate some of the most extreme effects that we see with the changing climate. And finally, looking at ecological growing, there's potential when done correctly and over a large enough time scale that we can actually see net incomes for farmers. That's the amount you have left over at the end of the day after you paid all your expenses, increase as we're able to implement these best management practices, which I'm happy to go into, and reduce some of the externally purchased inputs that get brought to the farm. So I want to dive into each of these more specifically. Slide. So from a marketing standpoint, here you can see a photo of our farmers market booth at one of the Ottawa farmers markets that we go to. There's no question, on an anecdotal level for us, consumers are increasingly asking for ecological products. I think there's varying levels of knowledge amongst eaters about how much and to what degree farming is contributing to the climate crisis. I think a lot of our customers are asking us how we grow, and the way that we grow, no longer just in relation to the individual health of their food. So they're asking about pesticides, certainly, in the context of their own personal health, but they're starting to ask about our practices from a climate context too, which is something that has changed even in the 10 plus years that I have been growing vegetables. And so seeing that change has kind of been interesting. And certainly for us, ecological certifications, such as organic certification, which we're now transitioning the farm into after being certified for a number of years on rented land. We're transitioning our new property to organic, and at least at the markets that we go to in the Ottawa area, it's a really critical marketing piece of us being successful, and that we get enough, lots and lots of people asking us if we're certified organic or not. And so it's an important marketing piece. Sort of in the broader scale, though, of looking at larger scale farms or farms that are not engaged in a direct to consumer relationship, we're seeing across the world like a much more increased appetite for ecological products, whether that is regenerative or whether that's other designations, some of which don't exist, some of which continue to be buzzwords. But I think as we see the climate crisis continue to worsen, and increased government regulation within this space as governments try to deal with this problem, it's very easy to see, and we're already starting to see the value in having third-party verified certifications. The Canadian Organic Standards is one, although it's not certainly exclusive to organic farming. There's lots of other certifications out there, and more continue to be developed. And in terms of scaling, ecological production for a broader consumer base and for export markets, those labels and certifications, I think, are going to really be a really important piece of the overall solution there, as long as they're done properly and actually have some teeth behind them and some third-party verification systems that mean that people can actually rely on the information they're getting from that badge or that logo that gets applied to a bag of flour or a bag of beans that gets purchased sometimes around the world. Slide. In terms of looking at on-farm resilience and mitigation, first of all, there's a broad range of best management practices. Let me untangle this acronym soup at the first bullet point here. BMPs, or best management practices, and GHGs, as probably lots of people know, greenhouse gas. Both of those things are really connected from a farming standpoint. Best management practices are just, it's a broad-based way of talking about different practices that farmers can use to promote different outcomes. In the context of ecological growing, a lot of the best management practices we're talking about are ones that are going to increase sustainability. And in the climate crisis, there's lots of research out there identifying different best management strategies that can actually have a tangible increase in reducing emissions as well. Some of those practices, cover cropping, which you can see in the couple photos here. You can see on the left-hand side a field of winter rye that we planted. This was the year before last, coming into the fall, a field of winter rye that will continue to live through the winter time and then come up in the springtime and provide some much needed ground cover to prevent erosion. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a field of buckwheat that we have planted there, and that's after it's been frost killed. This is actually just from this past season in October, beginning of October maybe, and that is all dead now, but the roots remain in the ground and will help similarly to protect from soil erosion in the springtime. And of course, that's relevant to us in our context, but other best management practices like rotational grazing and managing nitrogen are other practices which we know can contribute long-term to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, certainly, but also promoting things like soil health on the farm and helping to mitigate some of the effects of the climate crisis. On our farm, we have recently put in even more hedgerows on our farm. Hedgerows mix different plants, including some trees, but also different species. And not only do these hedgerows promote biodiversity, which can help reduce the number of pests on the farm. But they also have the added benefit in the climate context of actually breaking wind for us, and so it means that they block the worst wind gusts, which we know, an increasing amount of wind storms is going to be more regular within a changing climate, and so those sort of low risk practices that we integrated on our farm is a really long-term investment we're making, with the knowledge that probably this climate crisis is going to get worse before it gets better. And not only that, but help to promote more carbon in the soil, and those hedgerows can then sequester carbon from the air. So there's lots of these stacking benefits you can find by integrating a lot of different practices on your farm, and they all sort of are interconnected with each other in a way. For ecological growers, they know that diversity is critical to success, and so having strategies that work with nature and in harmony with nature is something that we strive to do on our farm. And in general, we've seen from a scientific standpoint, more broadly in agriculture, those have really positive long-term effects for farmers on yields, and also on reducing on-farm emissions, or at least offsetting your on-farm emissions. Slide. And so finally, this kind of dovetails quite nicely with, if you can manage the marketing piece in a meaningful way, and you can manage the on-farm best practices on your farm, what it can lead to long-term is reducing your on-farm expenses. And this is done really broadly. And the time that I have here, as we promote soil health, we know that soil health is correlated with yield, which is really which is really positive. And so as we can increase soil health, we can also increase the yields we get off of the area that we're cropping. But not only that, it allows us to, it allows us to invest in some of those mitigation strategies that will build fertility in our fields long-term and enable us to reduce the amount of inputs that we purchase externally. So for us, we buy a lot of compost on our farm. And so what we find over multiple years of cover cropping on 60% of the total land that we have in production, all of that is cover cropped with green manures, and so we grow crops there that we're not hoping to harvest and sell. We're growing it for the benefit of the land there, and over many years of doing this, you can build the fertility up and increase that bank to the point where now maybe we don't need to apply compost on an annual basis. We can apply it every third year, and significantly decrease inputs. And this, on a much larger scale, looking at agriculture as a whole, is still the case too. In that we know nitrogen accounts for a third of all agricultural emissions out there, roughly speaking. And so the idea that you can reduce the amount of nitrogen within reason by promoting soil health through other best management strategies is one that is, in addition to helping farmers earn a bit more money, it also is a positive solution for the environment and mitigating the effects of the climate crisis. So I know that we started a bit late, so maybe I'll leave it at that, and hope to circle back around during some question period during the breakout session. And so happy to pass on the speaking baton at this point.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stuart. There were so many valuable insights there. And yeah, definitely when we head into the breakout rooms, we'll have some time and opportunity to ask those really good questions. I think a lot of people joining us today as well are farmers. So getting to see how you have implemented these techniques and how it's benefited not just your farm and the ecological aspects, but also the bottom line as well. And maybe being able to take those vacations once in a while. So thank you so much. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce Ava and Luke to speak next.
Great, thanks very much. So yeah, we are Eva and Luke Dinan. Our farm is Grey Wolf Gardens. A little just quick background on myself. I've been farming for 10 years, farmed all through my 20s on other people's farms. And we have just recently, within the last 2 or 3 years, started our own farm. As was previously mentioned, we met at college, and I was there doing a forest technician program. And as you'll see throughout the presentation, that is a fairly crucial component of what it is that we're doing in the North, being that the North is primarily forested land. The decision to do the forest technician program was rooted in the understanding that the future of sustainable food systems in the North was going to be one that was able to integrate forest systems with food systems. And so in order to be able to best understand forest systems, I thought it prudent to take a little bit of time and go learn from those who understood it best. So as a sort of wonderful side benefit, I met my future wife while at school. So I guess that's one more piece of evidence for kids to go to school.
I'll just give a little bit more background information about myself as well. I do not have the same farming background that Luke does, but actually similarly to Stuart, it was the woofing program that got me started into farming. So for those of you that don't know, it's the worldwide opportunities on organic farms. And, you know, for me, the environment and the climate crisis that we were facing always seemed like I needed to do something with my life in order to, you know, try to positively impact this issue as much as possible. And small scale ecological farming definitely seemed to be the answer. So I did take a bit of a side route in college as I went to school to become a wilderness guide and a nature interpreter. But then, yeah, Luke and I met, and we decided to start our farm in Cochrane. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of them being the affordability of land, which we'll talk a bit more about later in terms of challenges. And yeah, well, we'll just get right into it and talk a bit more about agriculture and doing that where we are.
Yeah, so one of the key draws to Cochrane was, as Eva alluded to, the fact that the land was affordable. The pandemic and speculative land purchasing changed that a little bit, but generally speaking, as a rule, especially for young people or other people who aren't as financially equipped as others, the North is certainly an opportunity to be able to get into land ownership. So we didn't take the route that Mr. OK did in starting on rented land. That was partially just my own youthful ignorance and naivety, in that I felt that like it was just a necessity that I own something that, you know, that I could sort of call my own. I had a psychological need for that security, and so we ended up buying a clear-cut property that was up north. And some things that a lot of people don't understand about the North is that there's a very large area in northeastern Ontario that's referred to as the Great Clay Belt, and it's been understood for like 100 years that there was tremendous agricultural potential in this region. But because of the challenging climate, attempts to sort of jumpstart an agricultural industry have largely failed, with the exception of beef farming, because grass grows really well here. And so it had been predominantly beef farmers that were able to survive, and anyone who had tried to do something else came up here and failed and ended up going back down south. However, in 2012, I believe, the University of Guelph had done a feasibility study on agricultural areas across Canada and identified the Great Clay Belt as Canada's next agricultural breadbasket. So it's its reputation for agricultural potential is still very much intact. And as the climate has shifted in recent years, we have seen increased heat units. We've seen within single human lifetimes, we've seen changes such as being able to regularly count on 1 cut of hay to 2 cuts of hay. And so it's sort of like, it's a bit of a ground floor scenario in the north here for agriculture. So regenerative practices have been the cornerstone of our approach to growing food. And for us, we could sort of, you could look at it as in the regenerative toolkit has 3 categories of tools in it for us. It's holistic management, permaculture design, and agroforestry. And I feel like that sort of like succinctly categorizes the different tools that we're using to reach our objective. So one of the permaculture principles is valuing the marginal. And so that was part of the equation for why we purchased the land that we did. It was a piece of property that was fully treed, and the species that grew there is called balsam poplar. And this is a species of tree that's post 2008 and the collapse of the of newspapers, actually largely as an industry, produced a collapse in the pulp market for these species in particular. And it's not a species that has other high value uses. And so it created market conditions that basically treat this species of tree as waste. So it's a marginal product. And this is a piece of land that's only growing this marginal product. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, when you cut these trees, their regenerative strategy from an evolutionary perspective is that they root sucker aggressively. So you cut one and you will get 15 or 50 sprout backs from the root network. And so what we ended up with is a piece of land just chock full of these of saplings, of balsam poplar saplings, which have very little market potential for people who are looking at it from a commodities perspective of wood as a commodity. But for us, it was a low cost piece of land that gave us an opportunity to get started. So we combine multiple tools from those 3 sort of categories of regenerative approaches. Agroforestry is a big one, and it makes sense, I believe, that because we're starting on a property that was forested and we're within a region that is largely forested, that using agroforestry approaches, of which some were mentioned earlier, like treed buffers is one of the main tools in the agroforestry toolkit. And that's windbreaks as well as treed buffers on streams. These sorts of things add a climate resilience to our property, but they also have the potential for additional revenue streams, which adds an economic resilience to our property and to our enterprise. But really, like the foundation of our approach in terms of regenerative growing is a soils first approach. If you needed just a 2-word elevator pitch, sort of how we're doing what we're doing, it's a soils first approach to farming. And so I'm training with Dr. Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web School in order to be able to empirically assess our soil and our compost for its microbial and fungal content, so that we can really be as data driven as possible and as effective as possible in how we're managing our soil and how we're managing our fertility inputs and how we're producing those fertility inputs on site, in order to be able to really sort of grow our topsoil both upwards and downwards, if that makes any sense. It's everything is coming from the soil, and so that's the approach that we've taken. Now, it was mentioned that we're in the north and we're a zone 2B, And so we have like winter, like we regularly are down to like 40 below, and we have the risk of frost 365 days a year. And it could not only frost, but it could snow any month of the year, and has snowed every month of the year. And so when we're talking about the challenges involved in growing up north, we typically are faced with two restricting factors outside of fertility issues and, you know, compacted soil or things like that. Like those things can be mitigated, but the real constricting factors in a northern context are your light and your temperature. Those are things that are difficult to contend with. And so we're lucky in the clay belt in that we are not as far north as our conditions would indicate. Because of Hudson's Bay and James Bay, they have a massive cooling effect on this entire region. It's like having like a huge freezer open. It cools like the entire sort of James Bay lowland area, because we're really only just a little bit further north than the 49th parallel, which, for context sake, all of Western Canada lies further north than the 49th parallel. That's the borderline between Canada and the United States. And Paris, France is also on the 49th parallel. So anyone who's familiar with Elliott Coleman or J.M. Fortier, the Paris market gardens are sort of like the model for high intensity growing, like small farms growing a huge amount of produce on a small amount of space. So all that being said, light is not a big constricting factor for us. We have, even in our winter, we still are just around 8 hours of daylight, right at like winter solstice. Temperature, however, is a big deal because we are contending with that risk of frost every day of the year. And so the biggest sort of innovation that we're pursuing on that front is one that takes the forested landscape in the context of being within a forested landscape and seeks to employ another permaculture principle in that we're intercepting waste streams and continuing to value the marginal, in that we're working with some very sort of cutting edge wood boiler technologies from Europe that have extraordinarily low emissions, like particulate emissions. Most of what comes out of the stack of these boilers is steam. But in doing so, we're able to displace propane and natural gas, which is what all of the commercial greenhouses here and most other places are providing their supplemental heat by way of propane and natural gas. And what we have is the opportunity to produce a new market for the species that lost their market due to the collapse of the pulp market. And in doing so, we stimulate local economies in these northern communities that are within this forested context, and we can displace non-native greenhouse gas emitting fuels for solving this problem of how we control our temperature. And finally, when we're using wood for this, we are contributing and we are integrating our food system into the larger carbon cycle that our forested ecosystem is already a part of. And so it's, while it is very low emissions, to the point where the emissions from one of these wood boilers is the equivalent of 1,500 modern wood stoves, like one may find at a Home Depot. And so like we are talking about like incredibly low emissions. However, there is still some carbon that is produced when any material is combusted. But the carbon that is emitted in these systems is a part of the carbon cycle that is operating within the boreal at large. And yeah, with that, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Right. Well, I think we only have a couple of minutes left here. And so one thing I wanted to talk about was to touch on purpose and profitability a little bit more as well. And I just wanted to say, like, for Luke and myself, our values precede anything else in our business. It's very much a values first approach. how can we make our values profitable, basically, instead of the other way around. And so two things that we value the most are soil and our community. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that without either of these two things, like, we all fail. Like, we are all connected to each other as a community, and we are all connected to the soil, sort of whether we like it or not. And so, by taking care of the soil in the way that Luke and Stuart were both talking about, in terms of taking that soils first approach, it can actually increase your yield, which, therefore increases your, has the opportunity to increase your profitability as a farm as well, which is very important, because then it means you can also grow more food on a smaller piece of land. And then by taking care of your community and by really cultivating those relationships, that in and of itself can also increase your profitability, because, well, one of the other things we were talking about before as well is the increased demand for, ecological products. I mean, not even just food products, right? But it's important to have a level of transparency as a farm, and like really be able to have people understand what it is that you're doing. And, the more they trust you, the more they're going to buy your products. And, they really believe that you're doing something that's very important and that can't be overlooked. And yeah, and then I guess, like, we were just going to talk about a couple challenges and successes as well.
Yeah, I think that, well, for us, the largest challenge has been just the financial requirements that come with starting something from scratch. Like, it's substantial. And so organizations like Fair Finance and SNAP, which we were talking about earlier, and EFAO and NFU and COG, and like all of these things produce an ecosystem that help us overcome the challenge of climbing that financial mountain. And I would say, yeah, like, I mean, that is just far and away the biggest challenge. Like, give me 40 below winters all day long. The biggest challenge is how expensive it is to build something from scratch. So thank you, Fair Finance, and for what you do. And it is extremely important, like crucially essential, that organizations such as yours exist, because the only way we're going to see more farms like this on the landscape is if there's some way for people to financially make it happen. I would say that our largest successes have been around taking the approach that Eva was describing, which for me, you could summarize in the single word of integrity. When we are farming with integrity, we're taking care of our soil. And when we're behaving with integrity, we're taking care of our community. And when you have integrity and you have a reputation built on integrity, there is high levels of trust. And, like, I guess at the end of the day, cliches become cliches for a reason. And one of them is nurture your network. And that is just so true. Like, the value of relationships is just difficult to overstate. That's the relationships that we have with various people within our community, and the relationship that we are increasingly conscious of between our soil organisms and our plants and our pests and predators. And it's all relationships, and relationships are just easier to manage when you conduct yourself with integrity. So that, I would say, like, in terms of advice and in terms of our success, it would be that's our biggest piece of advice, and is what is responsible for our successes, that commitment to integrity. Which I think we managed to stay under time.
Yeah, so we'll end it there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. That was a fantastic presentation. I feel like that gave a lot of insight as well for me as someone who has lived a life in Southern Ontario and does not very often make it all the way up north. It's kind of like a bubble you're in down here sometimes, right? And then not recognizing the different landscapes that you're in Northern Ontario, but how important it is, especially going forward with climate change and how things may change in terms of the soil and light and temperatures, how we need to think about all the areas that we have the possibility to grow. So, and all the ways you guys are adapting is amazing. So it's a great innovations to help others who could potentially become in the same situation. So thank you so much. So Stuart and Ava and Luke, if you would like to, I think Stuart's email is in there, but I don't know if everyone can see it because it was from a different breakout room. So you're welcome to re-put that in there, to share your contact information so people can check out a bit more about what it is that you do. And thank you everyone for the fabulous discussion today. If you felt like sharing in the chat, maybe something that you found really valuable from today, you're welcome to, or from the breakout room discussions. I know we were having a great and lively conversation. So you're definitely welcome to put that in the chat. And we'd love to thank our speakers for today. So Ava and Luke and Stuart, thank you so much for spending the time and providing a bit of education around what it is that you do and what are some options for people that are going into this space, and also how interconnected your values are and the ecological aspects of what you do are with the profit that you're making, the financial sustainability of your business. It's really important that we highlight that as going forward, because sometimes people may have the conception that we have to compromise the financial sustainability of a business for ecological techniques or whatever it is, which is not the case when it's done rooted in this understanding of how to use them effectively. So thank you for highlighting that. It was a really valuable discussion. Hopefully that will carry on as the weeks progress and months. So we also like to thank our funders and partners who are all on the slide here. Without them, we would not be able to bring you these fabulous discussions and presentations. So this is our funder slide. And then our last slide is just with all of our contact information. So if you have any questions about what it is we do at the fund, or want to check out our website, there's an email there to contact us at, social media as well, and our website. So thank you everyone for a fantastic session, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.